Instagram stories for Monday, April 6th. I'm your host, Daniel Hill. Today on the show, we're going to have an interview with Shawn Kallet, who is a digital strategist. He works with brands and intellectual property owners to develop content strategies. He has over 20 years of experience in brand partnerships, working with media companies like MTV, NBC News Digital, Studio 71, Live Nation, V10 Entertainment, and he currently is the co-founder and co-CEO of 203 Creates. Here's my interview with Shawn. Today we're here with Shawn Kallet from 203 Creates. Shawn, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Shawn, for people who are not familiar with you, can you tell us who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I co-founded a company recently called 203 Creates, which is a boutique media marketing and content agency for brands with stories to tell. And my background before doing that is, over 20 years in media entertainment. I started at major media companies. The first 10 years of my career were largely spent at Comedy Central and MTV, with a little stint as a media buyer in there, but all coming up the sales side. So I was selling MTV media and shows and events back in 2006 to 2011, at a time when YouTube and Facebook were just launching, and reality stars were getting their first social media platform presence. I was hooked on the creator space and working with influencers and helping brands develop partnerships with influencers. And so for the last 12 years or so now, have really been focused on creator content, influencer partnerships, branded entertainment, working at a number of agencies and starting my own company, back in 2019, called Deepwater Strategies. And, for the last 7 years, I've been a consultant, an advisor, a digital studio leader, and, now really focused on helping brands, creators, and media companies develop content strategies and ways to monetize that content for commercial gain.
Okay. It's a lot there. Obviously, you have a huge amount of experience. I'm going to pause it there so we can take a quick break. When we come back, Shawn's going to tell stories about the early days of the industry and how things have changed. Stick around. Welcome back. Continuing my interview with Shawn Kallet from 203 Creates. Can you talk about some of those stories from the early days when you were first getting your involvement in a world that's obviously changed so much over the time you've been in this industry? But can you tell us some of those stories from the early days?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I was so lucky to be at Comedy Central and be at MTV in the early and mid 2000s when I was. That was really where the modern creator economy started. And it was with TV stars who had a Facebook page. So very early on, first just being exposed to talent was really beneficial. When I was a sales assistant at Comedy Central, we would go to company happy hours with Aziz Ansari and, Dave Chappelle's writing team and, executives from South Park, because it was just the type of culture that mingled, sales and marketing and programming and production, all as a group. And so I got very comfortable very early on dealing with brands and dealing with creators and shows. So it was super fortunate to start there. And, it was really in my time at MTV where, Facebook launched, YouTube launched, and we were selling, television integrations and media sponsorships and, custom content across all screens. And I always like to joke now, like when I got later into the influencer space full time, people asked, how did you know how to do this? And really, it was because of my experience as the sales liaison at MTV, working with Rob Dyrdek's shows in 2010 and the early part of 2011. Right. And I always joke that, I learned how to work with influencers because Rob Dyrdek used to yell at me on the phone every week. And, he talks about it now all the time in his podcasts and his, content that he creates, that he was one of the first to figure out how to commercialize his airtime and his content on MTV. MTV was getting ratings and audience. Rob was getting a platform for his personal brand deals. Yeah. And he was writing the contracts with those brand partners that guarantee them the exposure in the MTV shows. And here I was, the sales guy who was coming to these weekly production meetings with a list of needs from the various sales teams and our brand partners. And I don't fault him for it because he was protecting his deals, but it was early on in the days of doing these types of branded integrations. And, I just got used to him like yelling when he wasn't happy with how things were going. And Rob's a great guy. Like I've since gotten to work with the team that worked on Ridiculousness in later roles. And, it was just one of those funny things of like going back to my boss and saying like, Rob really didn't like that deal, or he didn't, his team doesn't want to do this. And you just kind of learn, A, how to position things to talent, and B, how to just kind of take some punches, but make sure that, I was doing my job by just sharing updates and kind of giving feedback. So, that was a really like key period for me. It was kind of getting to work with talent and really understanding how they think about, commercializing content, right? I think there's a bunch of stories that I could tell about MTV, but if I just fast forward a little bit, when I started at Collective Digital Studio in 2013, it was funny because a lot of the creators that we worked with there, idolized Rob, and they looked at him as a role model. So it was very much, comforting for me to know, okay, well, they want to work like television stars who are commercializing their content. I would go to brands and agencies and pitch them on this idea of, hey, this is everything you asked me for when I was working at MTV or NBC News without the $5 million minimum commitment in media to go along with it. And, back then in 2014, like brands and agencies didn't know how to buy it, right? I had a lot of friends who I'd worked with on the brand and agency side for years who, when I went to pitch them, YouTube creators, loved the idea, but a lot of them were saying things like, wow, like there's YouTubers who are making content and I can buy it. So I eventually like came up with a thought leadership deck back in 2014 that it was really 4 slides. It was, what's an influencer? Who should I work with? What are the outcomes and how do we scale? And I think to this day, most of the industry has caught up and doesn't need to be convinced anymore that they should work with influencers, but they still need to understand how and who and, how to measure it. And now we're getting to a place industry-wide where it's about scale, but it's about scaling with the right process and systems to be able to do it repeatedly, which 10, 12 years ago, like there was no reason for brands or agencies to keep working with the same influencers or even the same companies, right? Like when I was at Studio 71, we were competing for brand partnerships with Fullscreen and Maker and Defy and Me Too and Endemol Shine. And, at the time, brands were just testing the waters with creators. So they would allocate, $50,000 or $150,000 for an entire year's budget. And that would just be a test with one company. And maybe it went well and they would look at the recap and say, great, like, let's talk next year, or it didn't go well. And they would say, sorry, like, we're going to try with another company. And, you had to figure out like how to get through a lot of that. So early on, I realized, we needed a kind of stickier, offerings and solutions, and B, measurement to go along with it. So from very early on at, Collective and Studio 71, a lot of what I was doing was just evangelizing to brands and agencies that they should work with creators and trying to get RFPs and, proactive proposals so that I could show them, here's what this looks like. Here are the ideas. Here's the media distribution. Here are the measurement solutions. And, it was interesting. I mean, All right, I'm going to pause it there for a quick second. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Shawn's going to talk about when he saw the industry changing, how he anticipated it, and how he reacted. Stick around. Welcome back. I'm talking with Shawn Kallet from 203 Creates, and in this section of the interview, we get into some of the changes that he's seen in the creator economy. I was going to ask, when did you see it start to shift from, we want to work with this influencer one time, we have a small budget, to, okay, let's build a relationship with this creator influencer so that we can keep working with them because we're seeing success? How did you see that change? It was typically, this is a little generic, but typically the cycle would go, we're going to do a small deal first. If it goes well, let's look at next quarter or let's start planning for next year. And if that goes well, okay, now let's think about influencer as a media channel, right? Like I remember the first time a brand marketer told me that they were adding a budget line for influencers in their overall media strategy. It was Clearasil in 2015. And we had done a campaign. The first deal that I did at Collective Studio 71 was with Clearasil, and they wanted to promote to teenagers that Clearasil was, their acne solution. And so we developed a partnership with 4 influencers. There was Vitaly Z, who was a big prankster, Lucas Cruikshank, who had played Fred as a character but was on his own at the time, a creator. There was Wasabi, a team of 2 creators who have since split up, but Wasabi was what would now be like a YA comedy channel, right? And they all created amazing videos for Clearasil. Oh, and Rhett and Link were the other creators, Good Mythical Morning. So all 4 of these creators made amazing videos, and the brands loved it. And they saw a lot of organic traffic. And, it was not just great for the media agency that I worked with and Clearasil as a brand, but the Google team that worked with them, was really excited about it because it got the brand spending more, money and thinking about YouTube in a different way. And it was following that campaign that the brand manager at the time told me, they had seen such success, a good, brand awareness lift that, 2015 into 2016, they were adding it as a dedicated line to their budget.
It must have been very rewarding to see something that started from something very small to being part of the way a company thinks about media and spending going forward.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was a good one. I'd say even better one from around then was with Church and Dwight, and their agency at the time was Maxis, which has since changed names, but is still part of WPP. And, the first year that I worked with Church and Dwight, it was on their Batiste dry shampoo and Nair hair remover. And Batiste was a brand new to the U.S., and, we had an incredibly successful campaign. 7 influencers went to the Billboard Music Awards, walked the red carpet thanks to the brand, did their Get Ready With Me videos beforehand, posted all over, at the time, Twitter and Instagram and Snap. And, over 3 years where I had worked with them, year after year, that was one where the client actually told me that, within 4 years of launching in the U.S. and largely because of the influencer content, the brand grew to about 9 figures in revenue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there for a quick break. But when we come back, Shawn tells a story about working with Logan Paul that did not go according to plan. Stick around. Welcome back. In this section of the interview, Shawn Kallet tells a story about working with Logan Paul that did not go according to plan.
Have there been some where you set everything up for success? It seemed like it was going to work and then it didn't for whatever reason, factors in your control or outside of your control?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think one that we had talked about earlier was, Logan Paul and Dunkin' Donuts. And so Dunkin' Donuts was one of a number of brands where I was able to work with them to develop their first social influencer partnerships. And in 2014, 2015, Logan Paul was already big on YouTube and, Instagram, and that was growing, but he was the biggest star on Snap and the biggest star on Vine. And Dunkin', targeting the teen and, young adult audience, wanted to work with Logan to create Snap content and Vine content and social content that was going to, hit home to drive adoption of first Dunkin's new mobile app, which back in 2015, it's amazing how many mobile app campaigns we did. But we did a really cool integration where they not only sponsored Logan's content, we did a series of custom executions, but they made a virtual gift card in the Dunkin' Donuts app featuring Logan Paul.
Oh.
And I believe it sold out about 500,000 units in, the first kind of window of the campaign. So they very quickly came back and we planned a second campaign. And this was at a time in 2016, I believe, when mainstream media was just starting to pick up on influencers. And we had developed this campaign idea where kind of like an amazing race, Logan was going to race all over New York City live on Snapchat, going to different Dunkin' Donuts, using transportation as dictated by his fans on Snap.
So kind of choose your own adventure, but
Choose
the
your own
people
adventure.
watching are making the choices.
Yep.
I remember at the time, this was a very novel concept. Now it kind of seems a little bit
It does, right?
like, okay, we've done that before. But yeah, at the time, it was brand new.
At the time, it was brand new. And the day started out with an empty box of Dunkin', right? And the goal was to go to 12 locations in the city to fill the box with donuts that his fans would choose. So really, really cool idea.
Sounds fun. Yeah.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. A couple days before the shoot, we found out that 60 Minutes was going to follow us around. And it was the first time that 60 Minutes was doing a segment on influencers. Creatively, the segment was called The Influencers. And it was wild because we didn't have the brand with us for the whole day, but we had this film crew or news crew following us around. And we were doing things like, taking a rickshaw from Central Park to, Columbus Circle, and taking the subway and taking the, a water taxi, or taking, the ferry or the bus, or walking or biking or hitchhiking. I mean, he was trying to do, everything he could think of.
It sounds fun, but also with the logistics of you're trying to make content and there's someone following you making content about you making the content. That sounds like way too many pieces moving to track everything. Yeah.
It was a lot. And not only that, like while they are, interviewing Logan's manager and Logan, and they're like talking about how the deal came together. I was the brand partnerships director on it, and I'm worried that the brand is going to get upset of how they're talking about the deal and they're not there. And so, yeah, it was a stressful day, but it was a lot of fun. The challenge part of it, and apologies to anyone from Dunkin' if this is, it's all old news now, but what I didn't know at the time was that one of the elements that Dunkin' had bought on was an actual 60-second Facebook video, which was going to be the recap and kind of highlight from the day. And obviously I did the deal, so I knew that we were doing Facebook video, but we had pitched the deal in, say, March, and then we were shooting it in June. And in that period, Logan had rightfully noticed that Facebook's algorithm was favoring shorter content. So what originally started as a pitch, including a 60-second video, first, the day of the shoot, Logan shows up and says, look, guys, 60 seconds isn't going to work on Facebook right now. Let's make this a really strong 30. I said, okay, let me go talk to the brand. And talk to the brand, and it's like, well, we hear that, but, it got bought up the ladder as a 60 because that's what they knew, from TV. Yeah. So I spent, really 48 hours, the shoot, and then the next day editing, trying to figure out, can we actually make a 60, or was Logan just hard and fast no? And, to his credit, it was a hard and fast no, and he was right. That Facebook video ended up doing millions and millions of views, and the brand got a ton of value out of it. But in the end, it was a lesson in, communication. It was unbeknownst to me that was a key selling point internally, was that it would be a 60-second piece of content. And so when we came back and said, hey, just kidding, it's actually 30, they wanted to make good. They wanted to know what else we were going to do. And, it's just one of those things that now you would look at it and say, okay, first, the lessons I've learned from that are, don't plan any elements without the brand understanding that things could change, because, platforms are living and breathing things. Sure. And in the end of the, campaign, you want to focus on the KPIs, you want to focus on the goals.
Right. What is the outcome?
The actual business goals. Right. And so they wanted views, they wanted relevancy, they wanted buzz. They got that like crazy. I think eventually it became okay when they saw all of that it was a 30 and not a 60, because we had done this amazing, Snap execution and the Vine and the Instagram and all of that went with it. But that was tough as a partnership director, because, there were really no layers in between me and Logan. Right. And, if you're at MTV or NBC News, there's integrated marketing and production and programming and talent relations and all of these people whose job it is to kind of translate between, different needs. And in the creator space, which I still think is the best way to do it, you're close to the creators, but that means like you're working directly with them. And, I've had a number of times, whether it's with a creator in an agency or creator in a brand, or even the agency and the brand, disagreeing about something, and there's no right answer. A lot of the times it's subjective. And so you're just trying to find the happy medium. Art is always
subjective.
Right?
Yeah, of course. Oh.
Trying to find that happy medium. Like, I want you to authentically say our talking points just like this, right? And the creator will go, well, that's not authentic.
Right. That's not how I actually talk. Yeah.
That's not how I actually talk. So the Logan one, that first of all, he knew what he wanted as a creator very early on. And I remember that day, talking with him in Central Park about what his plans for the future were. And he had a vision in his head all those years ago about being, an entertainer and a superstar, and, really like leveraging social media in a way that he saw fans responding to. I think he still does that among the best in the world to this day.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. If you want to watch the rest of that interview that I do with Shawn, you can find it on my YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes, as well as all the links to connect with Shawn. You can find everything in the show notes. That is it for today's episode. Come back next time for more social media news, strategy, and other things you need to know.
Let's get it. The year was 2013. You posted your first pic and you're glad you posted a scene. Your friends liked it too, but what you didn't know is what posting on that platform would do. Taking all your time and attention, doom scrolling. Also, let me mention, you gotta post on every platform, putting content on every set just to conform. Likes gave you validation and you got hooked. Now engagement is down, you feeling overlooked. Hey, keep coming back for more podcasts. And find me on Instagram.